And we are recording. So hello, Jillian. Hello, Meredith.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you both?
Good.
Thank you for having me.
Jillian, it's our pleasure to have you. I'm going to give Facebook a minute or two just to let everybody know that we're here. If you're watching, we are recording this. So if you're watching it on YouTube right now, we aren't live, but it's going to be a great conversation. So stay with us. Jillian, where are you calling in from today?
I'm in Tucson.
Tucson. Okay. So you're in Arizona. And Meredith, I think you're just up the coast from us. You're up in Northern California, correct?
Yep, in the Bay Area.
Bay Area. So for those of us that are joining maybe from somewhere besides those areas and maybe who don't know Warwick's, Warwick's is located in La Jolla, San Diego, California. So we, as my sign says, and we were talking about earlier in the green room, my sign there says 1896. We've been an independent bookstore since for celebrating our 125th anniversary. So been around for a little while. So it's been one of the things we love to do is bring wonderful author events. So thank you, Jillian, for being here today.
Thank you.
Yay, it's fun. So Jillian and Meredith are going to chat today about her new book. Who's got a copy? Beautiful Little Fools. There it is.
Look at this foil.
Isn't it such a great cover?
Yes.
Yes.
They did a really good job in capturing everything that the book is. They did a really good job with that. So they're going to talk about that for about 30, 35 minutes, 35-ish minutes, something like that. So if you're watching us on Facebook right now and you have a question for Jillian, go ahead and pop that into the comment section and I'll pop in at about that 35, 40-minute mark with those questions. How you can order the book. Yes, you can order, and independent bookstores do ship books. So we were doing it before the pandemic, but a lot of people learned that we did it during the pandemic. So that was a good thing. I'll be popping in the link for that. Go ahead and click that. If you're in the San Diego, La Jolla area, we'd love you to stop in at the store and pick it up and see what other wonderful things we have. But we can also ship that to you. So with that, I think we've given Facebook enough time to let everybody know that we're here. Like I said, we're recording. So if somebody misses something, they can always go back and watch that. So I'll do my due diligence and do the official bio of you two. So Jillian Canton is the author of award-winning and best-selling novels for adults and teens, including In Another Time, The Hours Count, Margot, and The Lost Letter, which was a USA Today bestseller. She has a BA in English from Penn State University and an MFA from the University of Arizona, where she lives with her husband and two sons. She's, like I said, she's here today to talk about Beautiful Little Fools. We can keep holding that up.
It's pretty.
It is really pretty to hold up. Joining her is Meredith Jaeger. Meredith has a BA in Modern Literature from the University of California, Santa Cruz, which has another great independent bookstore there too. She is the USA Today bestselling author of 3 historical novels, The Pilot's Daughter, Broadwalk Summer, and The Dressmaker's Dowry, which has been translated into German and Polish, that's fabulous. Born and raised in Berkeley by a Swiss father and an American mother, Meredith currently lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her husband and daughter. With that, ladies, have a wonderful conversation, and I'll see you in about a half hour or so.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yay. Well, Jillian, I am excited to get started. I brought a very old copy of The Great Gatsby.
I have a old copy. This is my
excellent
copy
yes,
of The Great
that's
Gatsby.
the one. I have the sweatshirt with that print because I like that cover so much. But I think people like to know about what inspired the novel. So I know I read Gatsby in high school. It was assigned reading, and it was the first book in the high school assigned reading curriculum that I got really excited about. And then I read it again at age 30, just because I wanted to know if I'd have a different interpretation as an adult. And then I realized the character Nick, the narrator in the original, was also 30 at the time. And it was really interesting, and I still really enjoyed it. So I wanted to know, when did you read it for the first time? It was your dog who went first.
My dog started first. Someone knocked on the door. I'm sorry.
It's okay. So when did you read it for the first time, and when did you decide that you wanted to do a reimagination, interpretation, retelling?
Yeah, so like you, I read it for the first time in high school. And it was the first classic I was assigned to read that I really enjoyed and like stuck with me. So, exact same thing. Then I read it again in college. That's the copy that I kept. And I kept that copy. I didn't keep very many of my books from college. Even though I was an English major, I have like a few select ones. Probably I kept like 5. And then I would just come back to it once every year or two and reread it again. And there aren't a lot of books that I reread. I usually read it once and I'm done. But I think as both a reader and a writer, I always was really fascinated by Gatsby. I was fascinated as a reader because it just like captures this period of time so well. And so much happens, but it's so beautifully written and it's so short.
Yes.
It's just like, it's a very slim read, but there's like affairs and murder and parties and drama and like lying. It's so dramatic. But then as a writer, I was always really fascinated by the choice that F. Scott Fitzgerald made to have Nick narrate it. Nick's the outsider. And so it was really interesting to me that he chose Nick's point of view rather than Gatsby's. But I also always thought about the women when I read it. Most of the plot points revolve around the women, but they barely say anything in the original novel. And we definitely like their side characters, like side pieces, baubles. And so I would always like kind of wonder a little bit about them. And that was the original inspiration for Beautiful Little Fools. It was something that was always in the back of my head, but I never really thought that I would write it. And before the pandemic, I have a good friend who lives nearby who's also a writer, and we would go to lunch once a month and just like talk about book ideas or what we were working on. And we went to lunch one time, it was the end of 2019, I think. And I was saying, I had just reread The Great Gatsby, like for that time. I had said to her, I would love to write a book from Daisy's point of view one day. And she would not let me leave that lunch before I promised her that I was going to do it. And then I think it was the next day, just sort of like serendipity, I happened to see this article in USA Today that was talking about the fact that the copyright on The Great Gatsby was going to expire the following year.
Oh my gosh.
It expired last January. So January 2021. So it was like those two things. I thought, oh, like maybe this is actually the time for me to write this novel. So that was where I started.
I love that. I love that when ideas have been percolating for such a long time, because it's different with different books. Sometimes it'll be a newspaper article or something and you'll work on it for a year or two. But I love those stories where someone has been thinking about the idea for a while in some sense. And yeah, what I love about this book and all Jillian's books is the 3-dimensional characters, the strong sense of place, and the female protagonists, because I like a strong female protagonist and write from the female perspective as well.
You write that so well too.
Thanks. But what I love about your version, which I love even more than the original, was how you made these characters so 3-dimensional when we're not, like you said, in the original given much. They're side characters, they're seen as kind of vapid and beautiful, and so I really loved that you deepened both Daisy's and Jordan's characters through grief. They both lose family members that they love. For Daisy, her father and her sister, in the train crash. Is that even mentioned in the original briefly, or did you just think I've got to find, what was her something?
No, that was not.
Okay.
We don't really know anything about Daisy's family life from the original. We know that she grew up in Louisville. She was in, wealthy family. She lived in a nice neighborhood. Jordan lived down the street, and Jordan was her closest friend. And Jordan mentions her father dying, which is like a source of Jordan's grief in my book. But in the original Great Gatsby, there's one line that sort of opened up Jordan's whole story for me. And it's at the end of The Great Gatsby in the plaza scene where they're all drinking and it's extremely hot. And it's right before, Myrtle gets hit by the car. And they start talking about Daisy and Tom's wedding, and they talk about how this guy fainted. And Jordan has one line of dialogue where she says, "We carried him down the street. My house was 3 doors down. And then she said he stayed for 3 weeks and then daddy kicked him out and then he died the next day. She kind of said that in the middle of the conversation, and then it keeps going on. And so that sort of like really opened things up for me for Jordan. And I felt like her father's death and that sort of 3-week interaction with Biloxi was going to be very meaningful for her story. And so I took that. But no, Daisy's background, I really embellished and made up on my own.
But I mean, it was there for the taking, you know, without him diving into her character. And I loved her character being so complex, where you see her motivation for getting together with a man like Tom, where she says, you know, my sister wanted me to be good, but what if I can't be good? What if all I can be is pretty, you know, and we're bankrupt and I'm just going to go for it. And the best thing I can do for my family is to ensure that we don't lose our house by marrying this guy and making the most of it. And I think you do such a good job of showing the limited scope of women's roles in the 20s, what they could do. And I love that you brought Catherine in as a main character, because you said she's mentioned briefly, right, as Myrtle's sister
she's
in the original.
Twice in the original Great Gatsby. Yeah, she's mentioned twice.
Yeah, but I think she is probably, it's hard, I love all of them, but for sure one of my favorite characters in this novel, because she's so modern. And my favorite line that she says is, I could be someone in New York, not someone's wife, someone. And so she really is like the contrast from her sister, Myrtle, who's like still got this childish notion of romance and, you know, stuck in dreary ash covered Queens in the garage, longing to escape. And then, you know, Daisy, who's trapped in her own marriage, even though she has obscene amounts of money. And it's like Jordan and Catherine are the two trying to forge a different path. And I mean, Jordan's story broke my heart. It's such a beautiful, I don't want to give anything away, but it was like my favorite. Catherine
was such a blank slate for me because she's mentioned twice in the original book. We know that Myrtle has a sister and we see her 2 times. She's younger and she has a red bob. And I think that's all we know about her. And then she's in the scene in the original where Tom breaks Myrtle's nose. Catherine's there, kind of helps Myrtle out. And then she's at the end, they're identifying Myrtle's body. And the police kind of ask her if there was anything fishy going on with Myrtle, and she lies and says no. And so that's the only time we see her. And so I felt like I could really make her my own and sort of, you know, develop her character in the way she wanted. And so of course I was going to make her a suffragette and going to be a big feminist ahead of her time. Which I liked in contrast, you know, to Myrtle's character. But I think that's often true to how sisters are. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I have a younger sister. I'm very close with her. And that was such a strong, you know, and believable storyline, which is the love for a sister and Catherine just feeling helpless, wanting to get Myrtle to leave her abusive marriage. And she doesn't want to leave on Catherine's terms and be her roommate and have to, you know, get a job. And that's, just so, you know, true to life. And Daisy missing her sister, Jordan missing her dad, where, you know, you just, the way the men perceive these women is so different than what you show, which is that they have full, rich inner lives and dreams and, you know, aspirations, all of it.
I think it kind of like goes back to what I'm always interested in as a writer, which is point of view and thinking about how a story changes depending on who tells it. And of course, you know, Nick's version wasn't going to be focused on the women because that wasn't his world. Like that wasn't what he was interested in. And that was his story. But I felt if Daisy or Jordan were to tell the same story, it would just naturally be so much different because of who they are and how they see the world. So
absolutely,
that was the part about digging in.
One of the other things I loved about your novel structure, which was so unique, was your decision to bring in a detective, this new character, and to make it a murder mystery, rather than in the original where it's like George Wilson killed Gatsby in a fit of jealousy. The end, case closed.
Right.
And so
they don't investigate though.
Right. And so it's such a, you know, compulsive read, because not only is it, you know, wonderful with the setting in the 1920s and like these rich inner lives of who each of them was before all of this drama happened, you know, as a teenager in Louisville, you know, with Jordan and Daisy, but also that he's really trying to figure out which one of these, they all have motive, which one of these women might have killed Gatsby. And I loved that because it honestly kept me guessing until it was revealed at the very end. I couldn't figure it out.
Thank you. Yeah, I knew right away that I was going to make it a murder mystery. I mean, I don't know why I knew that, but the original Gatsby, does end with Gatsby being shot and George Wilson being shot. And they kind of just like, there's one paragraph where Nick says like, they wrapped it up really quickly and said it was a murder suicide. And that was the end of it. And then I thought, well, what if there was a detective who didn't believe that and thought that the women were involved? So that was sort of my first way into the story. And the detective character is really the only point of view character that's totally new, that wasn't in the original Gatsby at all. And I wanted to include him to balance out Tom and Jay, who are not very good men, not very nice men. And I wanted the detective to be a nice guy who just wanted to do the right thing. And he also has a wife who really kind of like informs all of his choices. And I thought that would be an interesting contrast to show too.
I really liked that about his character too. It was so sweet how much he cares about his wife and her health. And, he's a little bit older. It's like everybody's such a young thing, just, partying and living fast and wild with the times. And, here's this older middle-aged guy that's like, I just want my wife to be happy. I just want to settle down and figure this out. Yeah. So I liked that a lot. And I'm always drawn to novels with unique structure where you'll have sort of a Greek chorus chiming in, like in Big Little Lies, with all the different voices, or in some of Taylor Jenkins Reid's novels where it's like magazines and media, and I feel like I haven't played with structure too much. And so I got excited when, I was reading this, and it's like trying, something new where you're with each of the women, as the story's unfolding, and then back with the detective saying, okay, who's lying to me? Reading these testimonies. So
I had the detective come in, like my novel takes place from 1917 to 1923. The original Great Gatsby is just set over the summer of 1922, but all of the events that I have, I took from the original book. So I took the timeline that he sort of set out for them, like through dialogue and just through explanation. And then the detective comes in kind of whenever the year changes. So when we switch from 1917 to 1918, we see the detective, and then we see him again right before 1919, and he kind of moves things forward.
I love that. No, it worked really seamlessly. And also like visualizing Daisy's whole childhood. It was very vivid, as if it did exist in the original novel, even though you're right, it was just briefly mentioned. Yeah. It's so incredible. I love that. You have an amazing imagination. And then something else that I loved in your version was the fact that Jay is not a nice guy, because in the original, he's this enigma, and everybody, I mean, even in the Baz Luhrmann movie, which I enjoyed, it's like, there's this, man, and he's in love with this woman who he can't have, and you sort of feel sympathetic towards him and enamored by him. But in yours, like he's gaslighting, he's blackmailing.
I always
creepy.
think about the fact. I mean, I think first of all, in the original, we're seeing Jay Gatsby through Nick's eyes, and he's really enamored with him, and just sees him with these rose-colored glasses, and thinks everything he's doing is so romantic. But I would always like step back and think, okay, here's Daisy. She just moves into this new house in East Egg. And then this guy she dated 5 years ago that she broke up with moves directly across the sound from her and is like staring at the light at the end of her dock. And it just feels, from a woman's perspective, like so stalkerish that I like could not stop thinking about that. And even though Nick thinks it's romantic, I felt like, I don't know that Daisy would think that was romantic. And I do think Daisy's in a bad place in her marriage with Tom when she moves to East Egg. We know that in the original. And I think she likes the attention at first. But if you even look at some of the scenes with them in the book, he's very like pushy and forceful. And he tries to get Daisy to do things she's not comfortable with. And I felt like the clues were there that maybe he wasn't the guy that Nick thought that he was.
I really like that. I mean, I think that it's so important, to show it from her perspective, because you're right, with describing it that way, it's reminding me of Hollywood drama with Kim and Kanye moving across the street after their divorce. You know, I shouldn't pay attention to celebrity drama, but it's true, you know, and everyone thinks,
but
oh my gosh, like how psycho.
Gatsby like go hand in hand.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Exactly. And yeah, it's true. I don't think, you know, you would want an ex you hadn't seen in 5 years moving and watching your every move. And yeah, and then also, you know, both of us are moms, and even though the theme of motherhood doesn't come up so much, like that is, Daisy does have a daughter, and that's what inspired the title. And I love, you know, like perfect title, Beautiful Little Fools. And that line is in the original. I know when Daisy says it in your book, she says it after her daughter is born to her own mom, like the best she can be is a beautiful little fool, because she's feeling like that's all she can be. She got trapped with Tom, you know. Do you remember when she says it in the original? Does she say it to Nick?
She says it to Nick, but she tells Nick, let me tell you the story about when my daughter was born. And she says, I really wanted her to be a boy. And then when they told me she was a girl, I looked at her and I said, well, I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world. Beautiful little fool. So she tells Nick that she's saying it in the birth scene. And then in my book, you do see it.
Yes.
In the scene. But I've always loved that line in The Great Gatsby. And I always would think, Daisy is not a fool. We're just not seeing that about her. So I knew right away that was going to be my title. Before I really knew anything else about the book, I had the title first. And I have to tell you that has never happened to me before. Usually I'm like at the end of the draft struggling with the title, and I have to get my agent or my editor to figure out a title.
Yeah.
But this time I had the title first because I just felt like that was a perfect one.
It's such a fantastic title, and it's like it completely ties in to so many of the themes. You know, these women are not fools.
Yeah,
like they're restricted by circumstances and the time period. But yeah, Daisy is no fool at all. You know, and so yeah, and you brought it up a little bit where she's saying to Gatsby, like, I'm not the teenager that you knew. You know, for a couple different reasons, like the loss of my family has changed who I am. And also I'm a mom now, you know, and he just is not taking
and she says that stuff in the original book to him.
Yeah.
But, you know, like Nick kind of glosses over that. And it's like, what a great love story.
Yes. No, I love this whole, you know, one of the themes I noticed was giving the women their power back. Like, you know, in the original, it's so much about, you know, money and power and class and status and these different issues in American society, and like, you know, the dark underbelly of having that much wealth and power, and then seeing how Myrtle is sort of powerless. And then, you know, I like that you gave Jordan and Catherine and all of them the impetus to reclaim their power.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely in my mind when I was writing the book. I wanted the women to sort of have a chance to set the record straight, I guess.
Yes. So one of the things that I love to do when I'm drafting is research, and I want to know, you know, since we both recently set books in the 1920s, what type of research did you do, you know, aside from rereading the original, and how did you immerse yourself in that time period, or what parts of the process did you find fun?
The majority of what I did was rereading the original and rereading it so many times that I had, you know, every line and every piece memorized, and just like going through and like pulling out lines of dialogue and constructing a timeline, and making sure I knew where everyone was at every time. And there were a lot of details in the original about the 1920s that I was able to use as my research. Like, you know, from clothing, or what they were drinking, or, you know, what they were saying, or what they were doing. But I did definitely do just a little bit of research about the time period and all the different places where they move. I mean, Daisy and Tom are always moving, which I took from the original book, but I had to sort of research, all right, well, where would Daisy live in Louisville, and what would her house look like? Where would she live in Chicago? And, you know, where would they stay in Santa Barbara when Tom cheats on her with the the chambermaid.
Yes.
Actually, I think I took the name of the hotel from the book, but I like looked up
Okay.
what it would be like. So I was just doing a lot of little stuff like that. I read a book. It's called Careless People. It's a nonfiction book, and it's about the murder that F. Scott Fitzgerald based The Great Gatsby on. But there were just a lot of really great details in that book about New York City at the time, from, talking about what the taxi cabs looked like, to talking about the fact that, the New York Times said that it was fashionable to wear white one summer, but the summer before fashionable to wear black. So like little details like that I got from there. And I fell into this like huge research rabbit hole about the flu pandemic in 1918 and 1990, yes, because the book does take place in both of those years. And I started writing before the pandemic, and I didn't even think about that. But then I was mostly drafting during the pandemic. Like I wrote most of the draft March to June 2020. And so I was like, I have to get this in the book. Like this had to be a major thing. But that pandemic really came in waves. And so I realized that none of the waves corresponded with like the months when my book were taking place during those years. So I was trying to figure out what to do. And then eventually I did talk about the fact that some of Jordan's golf tournaments were delayed because of the flu. And then I thought, well, Jordan and Daisy probably aren't even paying attention to this. It's just like going on around them. So I actually end up in the book. But I did weeks of research about the flu pandemic.
That happens sometimes with historical fiction. I've also gone on tangents where I'm deeply researching something from that time period, and then it doesn't make it into the book, but it informs the writing overall, where you think, what was the sense of people, what were they worried about at this time, and then would that have affected the character? But no, those little details are so important, and I love it. It really shows through because you just feel transported when you're in it. And I love that you research the actual locations. Like I remember I was totally infatuated by the City of Ashes when I was a teenager. I was really into writing like symbolism in my English high school essays. And I just, had such a visual of these eyeglasses staring out over the ashes. And then you looked it up and you're like, this is Queens. This is some weird outpost of Queens. And so it was fun being able to envision like an actual modern map of New York and going, okay, this is where East Egg was, this is where West Egg was, this is where the garage was. Whereas in my teenage mind, it was just some kind of mythical place as opposed to a real place.
Yeah, it was really fun to research all the real places. And I mean, especially because I was writing most of it when I was trapped in my house and I wasn't going anywhere. So I was just like looking at pictures of where they would have been in France, and they were in Hawaii and the South Pacific. And so it was kind of fun to move around with Daisy and Tom when I wasn't going anywhere in real life.
Absolutely. It's so true. Yeah, I wrote my last novel during the pandemic also. And it was such a mental escape.
It definitely was a mental escape.
I understand why some people felt completely shut down creatively because there's just, too much going on. But for me, it was like, just a mental escape from all of the scary things that were going on in reality.
Spending every day with Daisy and Jordan and Catherine.
Yes.
Kind of like got me through those months of 2020 for sure.
Yes. Do you ever make Pinterest boards for visuals? Or like clip anything from old newspapers online? I
definitely have done that in the past. I did not for this book, but I'll do like a secret Pinterest board and all stuff. But this book, I like I said, I didn't do as much research as I have done with a lot of my other historical books because I was mainly, mining the original book.
Yeah.
So I did not do that for this book.
I love that.
Looking up a lot of pictures of like flapper dresses online.
Yes.
And
No, I think the fact that you were so concerned with keeping the timeline correct and like writing it out, I totally get that. And it's like sometimes you want it to be perfect to the point where I'll go so deep. I'm like looking at menus in the actual hotel where they would have stayed because I need the items on the menu to be correct. And then I have to pull back and go, it's okay. They can just eat something from the time period.
They can just drink coffee.
Doesn't need to go so deep to be an actual item on that actual menu.
No, I know I do that sometimes too, but less so in this book because it was, just more, I kept going back to my copy of Gatsby.
Yes.
Reference. Yeah. And like make sure I had things right.
Yes. Is this your 11th book?
It is.
It's so impressive. So having written so many, do you pick favorites? Like, do they fall into different categories? And sometimes it's historical, sometimes it's YA. How's your approach different, I guess, when it comes to writing historical than writing, something else? And do you have favorites?
I do. I feel like my favorite is always like my most recent book. And then I kind of like move on, and then my favorite's my next book. And I feel like if it wasn't that way, I'm not writing the correct next book.
Yeah.
Like, I should be the most in love with whatever I'm doing. So of course my favorite right now is Beautiful Little Fools. But at some point I know that I will move on. And I do like approach every book differently, but not necessarily because it's historical or because it's a YA or it's contemporary. I think it's just what the book requires. And I don't normally outline. Like a lot of times people will ask if a writer is a pantser or a plotter. And I would say I'm a pantser, which is meaning I like fly by the seat of my pants when I'm drafting. But for this book, I actually outlined the whole thing extensively. And that was because I felt I needed to stay true to that original timeline. And there were, lines of dialogue and scenes that I knew I needed to include. So I had this massive outline, like chapter by chapter outline before I started. And then I stuck to it when I wrote. And it was this like amazing experience where I just felt prepared every day.
That is so cool. No, I outline.
I repeat that experience, but even now I'm working on something else and it's not outlined. So it's okay. Just, I think it's sort of what the book dictates. And sometimes I like not outlining because I feel like it gives me this good creativity where it's like, I don't always know what's going to happen every day. And so sometimes I come to something great because of that. But this book felt like it needed to be outlined, and I stuck to it the whole time. And I turned in my first draft, and then my editor read it and she was like, "You're missing the last chapter." And I argued with her because I was like, "No, this is the last chapter of my outline." And then we like talked it through, and I realized she was right and I needed another chapter, but it wasn't in my outline.
So it wasn't there.
It's not in my outline.
Yes.
So I did add the last chapter, but other than that, the book kind of exists how I outlined it. So yeah. I just think my process is different depending on the book. I wish, and people keep asking me this question, I wish I had this like great process, but I just do what the book tells me.
I am super impressed by pantsers. I used to be a pantser with my unpublished, never published, never agented novels. And then I thought, you know what, maybe I need to read some more books on craft and learn how to outline. So I always stick by the same outlining method.
But you do multiple storylines in your books too. And I think books that I do with multiple storylines, I tend to have to at least have like some sort of broad outline because it's really hard otherwise.
Yeah, to keep track of the characters.
And yeah, some of my books that have only had one point of view, I've definitely not outlined at all.
Yeah.
All of my books that have like multiple points of view, I've at least sketched out like a little overarching line, but this was detailed. This was a detailed outline. Yeah.
I love talking with different authors about their process because everyone has a different creative process and what makes them feel inspired or creative, ready to get the words down. I like to write chronologically. Not everyone does. Yeah. But I feel like that's how I can recognize that I'm making progress by going in order, but some people, they want to dive right into the middle or tackle the crisis or
I always write chronologically also because otherwise I don't have a sense of the pacing. I need to read the book in the order that it's going to be read. And then I can sometimes revise it out of order, but I have to do the first draft in order. Yeah,
definitely. Me too. I always know my energetic markers, like what's going to happen at the end of the beginning, at the midway point, the big crisis towards the end, the climax, and then it's a mystery sort of how it's going to go from one point to the next. I don't do chapter by chapter outline. That would be impressive. But I do like a basic outline.
Yeah, no, I never have. And I probably never will be able to do it again, but it was actually a really great way to write a book.
Yes, well, no, it shows. It's a fantastic book. And I feel the same way. The most recent book should always be your favorite book. And it's like, as a writer, you want to improve your craft, and you're like, what can I fix? Like, how can I, or you'll read another writer who inspires you and think, try something kind of like this. So I love it. And I love reading your books. It's like, I feel so lucky to know on the internet anyway, such awesome people who, who also write historical fiction because, Yeah, it's like we are inspired by different time periods, different things, but then you know that there's a method to the madness. You know when you're reading it, how much work goes into making it read effortlessly. It's not effortless.
That's true.
Yeah. All right, I think that Julie is back.
Hey, I love this conversation. It's so I mean, I've got a bunch of questions, but there are questions that are coming in on
Okay,
Facebook.
great.
So we'll ask those first, and then I'll get selfish and ask some of mine. But you have lots of good friends out here. Tammy Greenwood, if you're still with us, hi Tammy. She says, congratulations, Jillian. Fabulous book. You're getting lots of love about the book, Jillian. So you'll need to go back on later.
All right, I will. I'll check it out after.
But Andrea has a question. She says she loves Gatsby. Why do you think this, so her question to you is, why do you think this book still resonates with readers after nearly 100 years?
Yeah. You know, what is really interesting, I'll answer that, but I'm going to just like add one point. What is really interesting to me is that when the book first came out, it was a critical and commercial failure, and it didn't sell, wasn't reviewed well. It actually didn't even take off until after Fitzgerald died. So he never even saw that it became successful. Like I think about the fact that if he could see the way people saw Gatsby today, I don't think that he would believe it. Yeah. But I think the reason that it still resonates is because it's like such a slice of this time in America. You know, we get such a picture of the Jazz Age and the Roaring 20s, but also just there's so much interesting plot. You know, it's like there's an affair, or there's multiple affairs, and there's multiple murders, and these horrible rich people doing horrible things, but they're glamorous at the same time. And I think a lot of the themes kind of still resonate with us today.
Well, I think there's just this fascination with ultra wealthy people.
Yeah, and that's like, still true.
It's there, that because they were this is before, you know, social media and all that stuff, but they were the celebrities of those days, you know.
That's absolutely true.
There's nothing better than celebrity gossip. I mean,
yes.
And they have a lot of celebrity gossip going on.
Yeah. And so I think that's, you know, it's kind of like our, you know, when the real world gets too much for all of us, we love to that's kind of our escape.
Right. And it's like, you know, maybe we don't like have these like extravagant houses and money, but like our lives are just normal, and like people aren't being murdered and getting hit by cars. And so it's like kind of like fun to watch from afar, I think.
It's like Succession of the 20s, right?
Yeah.
They were the I can't think of the name of the family right now, but anyways, okay, so to that point, were you intimidated about taking this task on?
Yeah, this is the question I've gotten asked the most, like since the book came out. So that's a great question. And the truth was, I didn't think about that at all when I was writing. I just was very excited about telling the story, because I always wanted to read Daisy and Jordan's story, and that didn't exist. So I wrote it myself. And so it was the most fun I've ever had writing a book. And I just had such joy doing it every day that I didn't think about that at all. I thought about that when the book was done, and we started to talk about, you know, like the fact that people were going to read it. And then I thought, oh, I wonder what people are going to think now. But it was not in my head when I was writing it. So the actual writing was just this like incredibly joyous experience. And people are asking me that all the time. And I think if I had thought about that, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have written the book, or maybe I would have got in my own head and started to question things a little bit. But
I love that you didn't, though. I think that's really interesting, though, that you didn't, because it's like, it's freaking Fitzgerald, you know what I mean? So it's like
I know. Yeah, I know. And it was really scary, like before anyone read the book. But I mean, so far the reviews that I've seen have been overwhelmingly positive, so which has been great. And I'm sure some people are gonna you know, have issues with it.
But there's always those, you know.
Yeah. And I think also I've written a lot of books about real people. And I definitely get nervous about those. And just like really feeling the sense of responsibility to any living relatives, or just like making sure I stay true to that. So in those situations, I tend to get extremely nervous when I'm drafting. And so I almost had a relief that I wasn't writing about a real person this time.
Right.
And it felt freeing that these were fictional characters, that like the bigger stuff didn't come into my head until after the book was written.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because I mean, we're talking, banned books and all that stuff. Hopefully this one never gets banned, but you never know. But it's like you both read it in high school. I mean, it's required reading for hundreds and millions of people have read this book.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated that you just that it was that's the answer. I love that. Okay. So let's see what else is coming in here. Mary is saying she remembers being a deer in the headlights when she first read Gatsby in high school. Can't wait to start reading this. And congratulations for all the positive reviews. So Carol, but more back to you when you were talking about the writing process and how you guys, and when you guys were both into that discussion. She wants you to talk more about what keys to pacing make a page turner. Is there something that's like, what is that secret bullet?
I think some of it is just like an instinct after you've done it for a while. But I also feel like I get that from reading a lot of other books, and I'm really attuned to pacing. I also like to watch movies a lot and like TV series a lot. I obviously I read a lot, but I feel like I get a lot of sort of like creative energy from watching that storytelling in a different medium. And I feel like movies are usually really helpful for pacing. But I always notice pacing when I'm reading, and I will put a book down if I feel the first 50 pages aren't well paced. That's just something I'm like really attuned to. So I don't know how I know how to do it for myself, but I do know if I start to get bored when I'm writing, that probably my pacing's off.
Yeah. And if you're bored, you're reading.
I'm bored, the reader's definitely bored. I mean, Meredith, do you have like a secret way to figure out pacing?
I have one secret way. I read one book on craft by Martha Alderson called The Plot Whisperer. So she talks about these energetic markers, and it's pretty simple. You just break it up where it's like a quarter of the book is the end of the beginning, where the character's entering a new world, something about their ordinary life is changing. The halfway point, is this conflict, like, am I going to go back? Am I going to transform into a new person? Should be dramatic. And then the crisis, more drama, keep heightening the drama, climax, the most drama, and then you bring it back down again. But yeah, I like Jillian. I love to read and watch shows and movies and think about how and when the information is revealed, so that you stay interested. And when I'm reading a good thriller, I told Jillian I love to read psychological thriller and like drama in addition to historical. And I try to think, even though I'm enjoying it as I'm reading, why am I turning the pages? Like, what is keeping my mind so engaged? And it's like just you slip little clues out one by one, to try and keep someone interested.
Yeah. And when you said that about energetic markers, that reminded me that I do kind of think, like I mentioned movies, but I do like to sort of think about the screenplay like 3-act structure. So I always think like, okay, this is the end of my first act, this is the end of my second act, and so I do kind of have those markers in my mind too as I'm writing.
Yeah, it's funny when you mention that, Meredith, when you guys are reading, when you're reading that, you're thinking about how it's put together, and when I'm reading, I'm thinking, who am I going to sell this to? How am I going to sell this? What's the elevator pitch that I have? None of us in this little Zoom room read just for the pleasure of reading.
Exactly.
Occupational hazard right there.
It's so funny because sometimes it's just like, very, very rarely do I read without the in my head.
Yeah.
Who's the reader for this? Who am I going to sell this to, kind of thing. So anyways, Meredith, what are you working on next for everybody?
Ooh, I am working on another historical working title, The Incorrigibles, but not everyone comes up with a genius title like Jillian. Honestly, my editor and my agent, they usually change it. So it'll probably be something completely different. But no, this one is focused on female inmates in San Quentin prison in the late 1800s. I didn't know San Quentin ever had female inmates, but it did. And so that's going to be one storyline, an Irish immigrant who's imprisoned. I was very inspired by The Exiles by Christina Baker Klein. And then the modern storyline, not super modern, early 70s, at the start of feminism, a woman who started the feminist movement, you know, going through a divorce and sort of stuck between her mother's views and, you know, these new views. And then she is a photographer who's sort of documenting the urban renewal taking place in San Francisco. So by the time I was working there, it was like fully gentrified. I'm always interested in the city's history. And in the 70s, you know, you still had vestiges of like the old San Francisco from the 20s, from the 40s, before these government projects came in and just knocked down like 70 square blocks of historic housing. And so, yeah, just taking a look at what was there beforehand and her kind of recognizing it as it's happening and then tying her story together with the Irish woman. I feel like I never explain. I don't have a good elevator pitch.
Well, but you're just in the middle of writing it.
Yeah, so we're writing it. And then eventually, you know, when you go on Publishers Marketplace, you get to announce your deal. You have a nice, neat little one-line pitch, but I do not have that yet. So apologies.
No worries. It sounds bad, but I love the, I don't know, I'm fascinated with like prisons and things like that too. I mean, there's a new book that just came out.
I love 70s.
Yeah, the 70s too. Because that's a really interesting time period.
Right.
You know, that late 60s, early 70s stuff that was especially going on in San Francisco. I mean, there was
definitely
so rich with.
It was right before I was born, and I feel like we're in the worst decade. Nobody has ever lived through anything as horrible as this pandemic. And then reading about the 70s, I'm like, you know what? It was pretty tumultuous. I wasn't there. It wasn't so great either.
Yeah, it wasn't so great then either. Yeah. No, but the prison stuff, I just read, I don't know if either of you have read Notes on an Execution.
I haven't read it yet. I have it.
It's really good.
Yeah,
it's I'm fascinated with all that. Yeah, it's really good too. Jillian, I know that you're working on something else because you always are, right? And I know the book just came out 2 days ago, and this is a very frustrating question to ask, but
no, I am. That's true. And I can't really say anything about it. So I have a worse elevator pitch than you, Meredith, but I'll just say it's sort of another feminist look at a different classic, and that hopefully I'll be able to say more about it soon.
Cool. Yeah, really great. Well, everybody's loving, in the chat, everybody's loving Beautiful Little Fools. I think it's a fascinating look at classic. And Meredith, you brought out some great points in the conversation. So thank you for being with us and doing that.
Thank you for having me. So much fun talking to Jillian.
I know, it's really fun. And Jillian, always great to see you. Thank you for being here. Best of luck with the book. And
thank you. Anytime. Thank you so much for having me. And Meredith, you were great. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, good night, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Bye. Thank you.